Right to the panel, the legal department of our event, Dr. Ilan Cohen, and from Reinhold Cohen, who is actually the father of this event. He is the one who suggested that we hold an event about Brazil, and Advocate Enrico Lopez and Advocate Benny Spivak of the KLA Brazil. Welcome here. Would you like to take a seat?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just actually warm up, and I will not spend more than 5 minutes of your time. I warm up for my colleagues from Brazil. My presentation, I think it's already almost redundant in view of the talks of the other people, of my four speakers. But just so let's, Brazil is not only soccer. I mean, it's really. It's a big economy. I think waiting for us Israelis is one of potential players there. So, I mean, people say, I think Brazil sprang, at least to my attention, many of the world in 2009. Suddenly it's an island. Not because something happened there uniquely. I think the economy was run wisely for a long time. And suddenly in 2009, it suffered less than other economies and suddenly was an island, I guess, of stability. I mean, it has some slowdown for about 2 quarters, and then it picked up again. And I think the expected growth, at least what I read, maybe I've got more updated figures, about 5% for 2010. And what interestingly, Brazilian debt, has been really troubled. Not so long ago, became investment grade very recently, I think in 2008. So these are changes, I think, that the Brazilian economy had. Some of the facts we said, it's the fifth largest country in the world, the fifth largest as far as population. I read it's a 10th. I was told by my colleague yesterday, no, in 2010 we're already going to be the 7th largest economy in the world. So I put as a figures, I corrected it, so thank you for correcting that to me. And I think it's no doubt, it's a growing world power, and I said it's also new to me that we're going to be a 5th largest economy, and in years to come, and probably it's true. If you think some demographic figures, just having really a relatively young population, I think about 50%. They have got more than 50% in the really between 16 and 49. So it's really a relatively young. I'm not speaking about the young people, but really the producing age. And I think that what we've seen in the world is an overall shift of wealth and importance. And this is also, we know about the new world, and I think it's not going to be, the world is shifting from the US, Europe, we all focus there, and I think the world is shifting dramatically, and I think Brazil is one of the new world. And no doubt, and I think my colleagues here will tell you more, is becoming a key player, and for many good reasons. Just what the Israel and Brazil have to offer one another. First of all, Brazil is an exporter of commodities. We are import of commodities. Brazil is actually, I think it ties in with other speakers here, is an import of knowledge. We are a net export of knowledge, as knowledge being actually, or intellectual property being the key export of our economy. So I think, being this, it seems to me of course, a natural match. There's room for us. And of course, some people, I think people spoke about the difficulty of doing business in Brazil. I suppose it's true. I don't have personal experience. But I think if you look at intellectual property or knowledge as a base and or use one of the programs that Mati Mops open, or probably others, and really work on a joint venture, I think it's true for most small businesses. Don't have the infrastructure or don't have the means to create a real operation like Gilad did. I think that's probably a way to bridge some of the gap that may exist in exporting there. So another thing which I found, Brazil invests is a very large world-class investors overseas, and I think there is also room for Israelis we've seen some investment of Brazilian entities in Israel, and of course people mentioned the World Cup and the Olympics. I think these are very big opportunities, especially companies dealing with security or security-related and others. Now, where does IP, just what I can say very briefly, I'm in the field of intellectual property, so I cannot, this goes towards the end, so I have to mention a few things about intellectual property. So, and first of all, what I've seen is a very big and changing interest of companies, still not in the masses as people go to China and the US, but people have a growing interest of protecting their intellectual property rights in Brazil. And, sorry, it was a mistake in the chat. It should be in Brazil, not Israel. Of course, Israel is, is not of the focus here. Now, there's also, we've seen some growing interest, at least if what I've seen is an indication of Brazilian companies in Israeli intellectual property. I see more and more indications of interest to collaborate. And perhaps we are not, we're starting, I think, to be also on the map in the Brazil. And what we've seen also is a growing trend of intellectual property-based deals between Israel and Brazil, and that's really the end. I think and I'll let the podium to my friends, to the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you, Ilan. Benny Spivak of KLA.
שלום, כבוד גדול נפל בחלקי להיות בארץ, במיוחד לדבר על ברזיל, על החרוקים שלה, עסקים שלה. חסרות לי מילים להתבטא לי נכון בעברית. לכן אני מבקש את כבודכם להרשות לי לדבר באנגלית. אני מתחייב שבפעם אחת אשפר את העברית שלי. תודה רבה. Thank you all, and for Enrique that suffered with me trying to understand everything, and he did not took 9 years of Hebrew classes. I just apologize for not being so sharp in Hebrew language. Thank you very much for you all coming here. It is a pleasure to be here in Israel again, talking about Brazil and legal matters. The idea here is to be very brief. We are going to have a two-phase presentation. First of all, I'm going to talk about Brazilian basic figures, and then Enrique will conclude and provide some very interesting inputs for all of you. We have been informed that basically we have an audience formed by entrepreneurs and startup companies, and this is what we have been trying to focus our presentation in. So if we do not have the chance to cover all the aspects that probably you are waiting us to talk, you feel free to talk with us during the break or afterwards. Just very brief, because I believe we all talk about it, about the biggest, we are the 5th largest country in the world, 5th largest population, largest economy in Latin America, for sure the leading player within Mercosur. We are the leading market, and basically what we sell the most is agriculture-based commodities such as soil, seeds. We have a strong demand, active support, policy, and support. So if you are in this area, you want to be in Brazil, you have the government as your best friend. The leading supplier used to be the United States with 15.7, but the Chinese just beat them. And 2 weeks ago, we have the new numbers for the year, and they basically reached 20% of the investments of Brazil. What Brazil imports the most is technology, and I would complement what Ilan just talked about, knowledge, and this is basically what we need to import, technology, by the creative or innovative industries. When it comes to the crisis, and no one told about it, why Brazil flowered when all the countries started to shrink when it came to the 2008-2009 economic crisis, and basically because we have a very interesting macroeconomic stability that is basically a sum of several factors, among which we can highlight the independency of our central bank. The president of the central bank, he used to be a member of a private financial institution, so he knows how the market plays. I would say that coming from Brazil, I would say that, and working with foreign clients, we are probably among the most accessible BRIC member. It's very hard to talk Mandarin, while I just understood that it talks here. Russia is hard to do business with. India may be hard, but Brazil, we come from a Western culture, and but we like to we call that we have Western culture with a plus. That's the tropical culture. And I want to talk about it a little bit. Brazil suffers from a very interesting phenomenon. We are a global wannabe, as you might be following our president. We are a regional giant, and we are a highlighted power, and we are becoming to be, we are ready to be a voice of the emerging economies. Just legal basics. I just want to move a little bit here. When I said about Western culture plus, it's just that I think that while we've been here in Israel, we've been talking with some of you, we talk with some friends, colleagues, clients, and people in the street, and it's very interesting that I have an Israeli mother, so I'm used to it, but not all you don't have Brazilian mothers, so we may not be familiar with our culture. You do. We have one here. Very good. So things in Brazil work eventually. So I know how straightforward the Israelis are, and I am like this. I guess that usually attorneys and financial people, they like to be like this. But in Brazil, things will happen. But always remember that there's a comma and then the eventually. So things take a slow pace, but things will happen. Just basics over, if you are planning to do business, there's no way you cannot talk about legal matters. So first thing, forget about United States legal system. So if you are familiar with that, it's good for you, but in Brazil things work a bit differently. For example, civil law concept prevails over common law. What does that mean? That basically the legal decisions, the court's decisions, they are guidelines. They are not binding rules. They will not bind every and each following similar decision. They will set only guidelines. So doctrinal works, books, academics, lessons, teachings, this is all will count. Okay. Once again, I'm talking about a slow-paced court system. It's not actually slow in the sense that it's not going to happen. It's just that it's complex. It will take time. We have resources. We have appeals. We have bureaucracy. And things take a little while to happen. But once again, comma, eventually will happen. We have a very strong case law, as I would like to say. That is, if you are in the knowledge-based industries, such as technology, you will find very interesting jurisprudence that will protect your business, such as technology. Someone stole my idea, my information. Nowadays, you do have very important decisions on your behalf. We have very strong, and earlier today we talked about, I heard someone talking about the importance of the government, the rules in Brazil. Something that's very interesting to learn is that we have administrative powers, such as regulatory agencies. So, for example, if you are in the business of pharmaceuticals, biopharmaceuticals, food, seed, you will have the health authority all the time over you, such as the American Food and Drug Authority. In Brazil, we have the Anvisa. So it is very important to learn that you have, besides the government, besides the court, you will have a regulatory agency that will oversee all your activities. Brazil is starting to be a very active member in the international trade system. We all heard about the thing of cross-retaliation and the medicine seizures. I'm not going to talk about it, but yes, we are very active, and the Brazilian government is very aware of what's going on in terms of international trade system. And I would say that for that, Brazil is becoming the voice of a emerging market. Quick here on intellectual property, and as we are talking about a country as Israel that mainly export technology, and due to the need of Brazil to be a great importer of technology, the first thing that you have embedded in the technology is knowledge. This is what you have. And you want to ensure that whenever you have this knowledge, this idea, this intangible asset exported, that it will be treated like it's in your home country. So intellectual property is something that you need to keep in mind. Brazilian legislation related to IP is very similar to other legislations in the world. Basically because we are a member of the World Trade Organization, so we have patent, trademark, and fair competition, plant varieties, seeds, very similar to other countries as we follow the TRIPS agreement. That's the intellectual property agreement of the World Trade Organization. Our system then, it's new due to the TRIPS agreement based on 96, so we have less than 20 years of it, but it is improving. And not only this, but the speed of registration. Okay, probably 10 years ago, for have a trademark registration, it would take 6-7 years. Nowadays, it takes around less than a year to have it registered. So this is something that is improving. I would say that the biggest thing that we have right now, and this is the hot topic, it's the new innovation law, that it has less than 5 years, and it basically regulates the relationship, the existence of startup companies, and it provides tons of benefits for those companies that are university-based. So what we hear in Israel about small companies with big or not that big pipelines of technology, but with a good technology solution in Brazil is starting to be regulated and to be sponsored by the government. And when I mean sponsored, I mean tax benefits, governmental funding, and nice and very important infrastructure for regulation. What's going on in Brazil in terms of business from a legal perspective? What we have been seeing a lot, especially in our practice, that's in IP and innovation, we've been seeing that we have basically two technology markets. We have the standard and traditional markets, such as ICT, information and communication technology, defense, basically in terms of Israel. This is what we have been seeing a lot. The Brazilian government is a huge buyer, is a huge client of technology, of standard technologies, and we have the forthcoming big events. So Brazil managed to get the two biggest worldwide events, the Olympics and the following World Cup. They will be hosted in Brazil. So infrastructure is something that we will need, and solutions for that we are going to buy. So you need to be very, very aware of that. And the Brazilian government started to browse, and they are starting to look around and talk to people. So keep your ears and ears and eyes very open. And the new thing that's very interesting is that companies are starting, traditional companies, they do not want to spend that much money in R&D activities, research and development. So what they are doing is that they are acquiring new pipelines of technologies. So for a pharmaceutical company, a Brazilian one or a branch of international one, is very interesting to simply buy a new technology from a startup company. So if you are engaged in the nanotechnology business, nanocosmetic business, biotechnology, and especially clean tech, whatever that means, but whatever reduces the environmental damages and improves performances in each and every industry, there's a room for you in Brazil. Doing business in Brazil, is that something, it is a new language, we'll all be talking Portuguese, I don't understand. No, don't worry about it. You need to have a global approach. You need to have, when it comes to strategy of protecting your technology, you need to have a global view, so it's okay to have one strategy, but you need to have also a local approach. There's no one size fits all. There's important to have a global view, but you need to have some local support, some local adjustments, and as we like to call the tropicalization of some of your strategies. Okay? And for last, before we go to the other aspects, registration. That's all that sometimes we hear about. What about my patent? What about my trademark? What about my domain name? I want things to move fast. Yeah, they are moving fast. We are starting to see improvements. You won't be able to get in 2 days. You won't be able to get in 2 months. But you won't. either get in 10 years. You are going to get in less time and in a very efficient and cost-effective way. Okay? I want to invite my colleague Enrique, and I will remain at your disposal to provide further information. Thank you.
Many decided to run away from the corporate aspects. Neither he or I are corporate lawyers. I'm a tax lawyer, so he left the dirty job to me. But going on the corporate aspects of doing business in Brazil, first thing you have to be aware about is that Brazil still has foreign exchange controls. It is a pretty standardized and consolidated type of market and structure. I mean, you won't have trouble getting money in and out, but it's good to know that within Brazil you can only use Brazilian currency. So whenever you're sending money in, it's going to be converted into Brazilian currency. Whenever it's you need your original currency back, you have to sell that in that regulated market. Because of that circumstance, it's very hard for you to find or to see a structure where you have an unincorporated joint venture. If you are going into some sort of joint venture in Brazil, what you usually see is a Brazilian entity, a local entity. The use of unincorporated structures make it very hard for you to get money in and out and make governance and other similar issues very difficult. There are very few restrictions on what foreigners can invest in Brazil, none of which applies to technology. The main two corporate types in Brazil are the so-called corporations, Sociedade Anônima. That is a more formal type of company which can issue shares in the stock market, can go public, can issue securities, has special rules on minority protections, and it's a more formal type of company, and it does have some requirements as publishing financial statements and things of the sort. The most widely used type of company is the limitada. The limitada is very flexible. You can have basically whatever you want in the bylaws, and it can be accompanied by a quota holders agreement, a partners agreement, or not. But you usually have some sort of a company established in Brazil to operate in there. The other aspect that we mentioned here as general aspect is that labor laws are fairly strictly regulated. There's not much room for negotiation. Everything you have to pay to your employees provided for in the law. You might have a few negotiations with unions, little adjustments to the salary, but it's basically what's provided for in the law. And it is quite a bit, even though salaries are not so high in Brazil. The charges on the salary, the added labor cost to the base salary can get up to about 60%. That's the usual rate. There is collective bargaining agreements, but you shouldn't be afraid of that because, as I said, unions may bargain some special benefit, some benefits in exchange for raises of salaries, but basically you have to follow the law. If you are moving to Brazil, if you are doing business there, of course, as a foreigner, you need visas. There are several types of visas depending on what the foreigner is doing there, whether it is temporary, technical, or permanent. If it is a situation where you have an Israeli citizen moving into Brazil, you probably run into minimal capital requirements in order to get a visa for that worker. In terms of taxes, we're going to get there in the next slide. I'm going to go in more detail there. Is it page down? Space. Now here, I think we heard a lot about Brazilian taxes, how complex it is. I have to say, after doing that for 20 years, you get a good idea of how this works, and you're no longer that much afraid of Brazilian taxes. I mean, it is a complicated system, but it eventually works out. It is manageable, even though it's a lot of work. I mean, taxes in Brazil are usually seen as a strategic part of the business. It's not like in other places where taxes are just another event of the business. You have to look at tax as one important strategic component of your strategy, of your business in the country. We have already listened about the taxes levied on importation, and I'm not going to go over that again. What I think it's important to remark here is that even though we have this import tax, which can be pretty high depending on the type of goods that are being imported, it is very usual for Brazilian companies to get exceptional exemptions when importing goods from abroad or when importing capital assets. You can go to the Ministry of Development and request for a specific exemption for equipment that you're importing. And this is very often granted. Brazil does have a common tariff with the other Mercosur countries, but there is an allowance for 100 exceptions to that tariff. And within those 100 exceptions, if your good qualifies for one of those, you can request that exemption, and it's probably going to be granted. You just have to plan ahead, because, as Benny said, everything happens in its own pace and its own timing, and it might take you 6 months to get that recognized, but eventually you can get that. With respect to IPI, ICMS, BIS, and COFINS, those are, in theory at least, recoverable taxes. Those are all VAT type taxes. What happens many times is that due to the circumstances of the business, these taxes end up not being recoverable, become a cost, and that may generate a big problem. You may be accumulating credits that you cannot convert into cash. So you have to be very careful about that situation.
Why can't you convert it?
Sorry, what's that?
Why can't you convert them to cash?
Because basically those taxes may be, the credits that they generate may be used to offset the same taxes or similar taxes on your sales. You pay them on importation, and then you recover them upon sale. But it might happen that your sale is subject either to an exemption or to a special regime that doesn't allow creditability. And then what happens is that some of these laws provide for cash refunds, some of them don't. And the ones when there is a provision for a cash refund, the government simply never refunds that. So you're stuck with lots of credits that press a lot your cash flow. In addition to the taxes that Ronan has very competently described here to you, I would add that when the company is doing business in Brazil and it's imported its inputs, it has manufactured and is selling now its products, in addition to all the transactional taxes, the IPI, ICMS, BIS, and COFINS, and maybe ISS if it isn't providing services, it is subject to a corporate tax on its profits. This corporate tax is charged at a combined rate of 34%. It is made of two combined taxes. And then there's also a payroll tax. So if you're in a labor-intensive type of activity, payroll tax may be a significant issue. It can range from 20% to 28%. And it used to be a big issue, for example, for companies trying to do outsourcing or centers of telephone call centers and etc., because that was very labor intensive, and the cost of payroll tax was very large. Brazil has passed legislation providing for a reduction in payroll tax if you're exporting those services, so that there is a gradual reduction that can reduce the payroll tax to half of the usual rate. The 60%, no, that's not in the 60%. Right. So these were the taxes that Ronan has described, but the bad news is that there are additional taxes. If you're making payments abroad from Brazil, there are withholding taxes that are levied. Brazil doesn't levy consumption taxes or VAT on exports in general, but it does tax payments abroad. And depending on the nature of the payment, you have a different type of tax. So characterization of what you're paying abroad, drafting of agreements and registration of these agreements with the appropriate authorities is a very important portion on planning your business. If a Brazilian is paying services abroad, he pays a 15% income tax, a 10% special technology tax, 9.25% of PIS and COFINS, and 5% of service tax. And again, those are all levied on each other. It's a big mess, the calculation of that. Sorry, was that?
Tip included, yes, tip included. Not just
so if a Brazilian is paying royalties abroad, the good news is that there's not the turnover tax, 9.25, and no service tax, but you're still subject to the income tax and the special technology tax. And the problem with royalties is that royalties have a deductibility limitation. A Brazilian cannot pay as royalties more than 5% of the net revenues generated from the sales of the products or services that employ the technology. So this is a tax limitation that tends to be used by the Brazilian Patent Office to limit payments also. Every agreement for transfer technology has to be previously registered with the Brazilian Patent Authority, and they'll say how much you can pay as the Brazilian can pay as royalties. And they tend to look at this tax limitation as also a payment limitation. Software licenses, if it does not involve the transfer of technology, and by that I mean basically transfer of the source code, are subject to a 15% tax, income tax, and a 5% service tax. It's important to say that under our double taxation treaty, you can get relief for the 15% withholding tax, but not for the other taxes that are not considered taxes on net income. Good news is that after you produced, sold in Brazil, and paid all your taxes, you can send dividends out of the country tax-free, no matter where the shareholder is, which is a good thing. There is in Brazil a concept of payment of interest on the equity that the shareholder holds in the company, is as if it were a payment in lieu of a dividend. It replaces a dividend. It is taxable at 15%, but on the other hand, it is deductible. So if you're a very profitable company, you might get a good tax break here by paying this interest instead of paying dividends, and you get a 15% withholding tax, potentially creditable in the destination country, and together with that, you get a 34% deduction from your corporate tax. There is a simplified regime of taxation that is applicable to companies invoicing up to 48 million reais a year, which corresponds to what? 24 million shekels?
Around.
No, the other way around.
Yeah.
So like
around 20 USD.
Almost 100, yeah. And so those pretty sizable companies can opt for that specific regime. Taxation on the profits there is determined not on accounting profits, adjusted accounting profits, but it's based on percentage of gross revenues, for companies in the service business that deemed profit is up 32% of the gross revenues. So you apply the regular corporate rates to 32% of the gross revenues. That may end up ranging in an income tax of 5% to 8% of gross revenues, which for service companies might be very good. If you're not in the service business, if you're selling goods, then the percentage is even lower. The percentage of deemed profit is 8%. So taxation, income taxation can be pretty low there. And that also changes the regime of the turnover taxes, which move from a value-added type to a gross revenue type tax. That's getting too much detail. The other aspect I would like to mention is the possibility that companies have to get first export subsidies. As Benny has already mentioned, that we have laws in place to foster exportations from Brazil and to develop the technology industry there. But besides that, there's also a very concrete, a very real possibility of companies entering the market, getting tax exemptions, temporary exemptions from state authorities and from municipal authorities on all municipal and state taxes. It's very usual that those authorities will grant exemptions for periods of 5 or 10 years, which help a lot startup companies. And that has to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. You got to think ahead where you want to be in terms of market, resources that you're going to need. And then when you decide at the region, you go fish for the best incentives. There's really a big war among states and municipalities in Brazil to try to attract investment, and they're being really aggressive in granting benefits, which taxpayers can take advantage of. I think those were the highlights I wanted to mention. Thank you.
You use local distributors in Brazil. You save some of those taxes?
Well, you will, but he will not. I mean, your distributor will be subject to all that. Yeah. So it's probably going to be factored into the price and the commission and etc. But if you're selling, you got to see on a case-by-case basis. If you're supplying to the government, for example, if it is a government procurement type of situation, you're much better off selling directly from abroad, because government has exemption of basically every tax. If you're going through a local distributor and you have this issue of accumulation of credits, of non-recoverability of taxes, then you run into a problem.
Regarding the dividends that the Brazilian company pays, the tax, zero tax, is it the same for a private shareholder or a company that holds the shares?
That is right. That's correct. No matter who the shareholder is.
Or how he holds the shares through a company or as a private individual?
That's right. I mean, there are sometimes there are regulatory requirements whereby you need to have a Brazilian company in the telecom industry, for example. But other than that, you can hold your shares directly into the Brazilian operating company, and that is fine. And you might need or want to plan ahead your entry into Brazil. I mean, if you're acquiring an existing business, you will probably want to have a Brazilian holding company, but that's for a specific tax reason, which is that in Brazil, the goodwill, the premium you eventually pay for acquisition of a Brazilian company may be amortized for tax purposes. And the requirement you have for that is that this be paid in Brazil, and then you merge the vehicle company, the holding company, with the operating company, so that you can trigger that tax amortization. But that once this merger has occurred, then the Brazilian, the foreign company will have the investment directly into the operating company, and that's usually the most efficient structure. I mean, there's really no reason for you to have a Brazilian holding. For offsetting what?
Offset procurement by Brazil. When you sell to the government,
Yeah.
do you have to buy in Brazil something else for as percentage of what you sell?
Not necessarily. The general rule for government procurement is that under equal conditions, the Brazilians have preference. The requirements for each public bid are going to be set in the specific bid request, but it's usually under similar conditions. It doesn't the public bids do not require any kind of a counter measure.
I assume you're talking about the defense industry, and yes, if you're talking about supply of products to the Brazilian government or such as solutions, yes, sometimes you do have offset credits. Such, for example, the Brazilian government is procuring new jets for our Air Force, and everybody criticized the Dassault, the French jets. The big picture behind it is that basically the products will be part of the products will be manufactured by Embraer. That's the Brazilian air company. So yes, there is a big offset behind it. But as Henrique tells us, usually offset credits for now, currently in Brazil, for public procurement, is for the industry biz only, and it is the bidding document that will guide you. So. Yes, there is, but it's not a mandatory for each and every aspect.
Assuming that you have two options, using the commission agent or a distributor, what would be the multiplier difference, more or less, assuming that the distributor or the commission agent will be doing the same percentage, more or less?
Yeah, the question is what's the most efficient? What will be the multiplier if you're using a commission or agent structure rather than a distribution structure? And the answer to that is that's exactly where the issue is in Brazil. Is you need to see exactly which product you're talking about, where you're importing from, where you're selling to. From where you're selling to where you're selling, whether your customer is an ICMS taxpayer or not, whether the product is subject to tax substitution regime or not, which regime of PIS and COFINS applies. So there are several variables you have to consider in order to answer that question. And I'll say to you, it's even hard to tell you to give you a generic number, because it's going to apply just to the generic cases, and basically in Brazil there's very few generic cases. Everything is specifically regulated, you know. Yeah.
Are there any advantages building a manufacturing facility that will import the components from Israel, assemble the product in Brazil, and resell the complete product as a Brazilian product? Are there any advantages? If you do it in Brazil or in the tax-free zones, as I said, there are some free zones in Brazil.
Okay. If you have not heard the question is there an advantage of having a local production of components sent from Israel into Brazil and then sold worldwide? And the answer is yes. For one thing, if you are manufacturing in Brazil and you're importing components and adding value in Brazil, of course, that Brazilian value added is not going to be subject to all the taxes in importation. The fact that you are manufacturing in Brazil entitles you to some tax benefits, financing from the government. You have to talk to the state where you're going to be located, the municipality where you're going to be located, to see what's available. But there's quite a bit of incentive for local manufacturing. And then exportations from Brazil, as I mentioned, are not taxable except for income tax. If you are really thinking about using Brazil as an exportation platform, then you might consider going into a Brazil free trade zone, the Manaus zone. The problem there is getting in and out is kind of in the middle of nowhere. So you end up by having to pay a lot of freight and transportation. But that's something that you can consider. Usually, and also you buy manufacturing in Brazil, depending on the conditions, the issue of the jump in tariff and the issue of local content, you might qualify for Brazilian origin, which entitles you to all the trade benefits with all trade partners of Brazil.
Yeah, and just an additional comment that if you are in the chemistry, biochemicals, or semiconductors business, we have what we call the semi-free trade zone that surrounds São Paulo. It's the region of Campinas, and it's like the countryside of São Paulo, in which you have a pool of companies that force the government, the Paulista government, to provide certain benefits, such as what Henrique just told about the tax exemptions. So if you are in one of this emerging technology business, besides the Manaus trade zone, you have other that you can look into. So yes, there is some benefits that you can browse.
Yep.
Approximately the number of patents granted annually in Brazil, and would you know by any chance how many of them are granted to Israeli companies or individuals?
Yeah, sure, yes. According to the WIPO, that's the World Intellectual Property Organization, Brazil is number 10 in granting of patents, and is the number 2 among the emerging markets. It's number 3 behind only China, of course, and India. So we are in front of tons of other countries such as Mexico, Turkey, Argentina. So we are very well positioned in this regard. And we have a lot of Israeli inventors, but not of Israeli holders of the rights to exploit economically that. It's very interesting because in Brazil you can, and even according to international legislation, you can indicate the name of the inventor, the guy behind the author, the inventor as is, and the one that will be exploiting commercially the invention. So it's very common that you have Israeli inventors, and I have dealt with a lot of them, and it's very interesting, but not a lot of companies, Israeli companies holding that interest. Basically, it's the employer or a company that acquires the right. So it's very common that you have a scientist from a university that basically sells the invention to the company, and he will not be getting royalties or something like this. He will hold the paternity rights, that's what we call, but the one that will be exploiting, it's not necessarily an Israeli corporation or a company.
I don't know much about Israeli taxation, but that fact or that circumstance is actually a very common type of tax planning with regard to other jurisdiction. You export your intellectual property so that you don't subject the income to taxation in the country of origin. That might have something to do with that.
Other questions? Thank you very much. Thank you so much for flying in from Brazil, especially for this event. I wanted to comment about what we heard. Obviously, the taxing system is pretty interesting, and obviously you would need to develop a budget, a legal budget, to cope with this. But these are also barriers of entry to competition. Once you've dealt with them, this is a barrier for everybody. So similar to other countries like Japan, where everything is very slow and expensive, this is a barrier. You learn how to cope with it. There are a lot of people here that know a lot about Brazil. How many of you here have done business in Brazil or have consulted to other people doing business in Brazil? Look at this. All these people you can talk to during the break and learn something about doing business in Brazil. Now, we have a very long tradition of holding long breaks. The break today will be 35 minutes, which is, we normally hold longer breaks. And in the break, use this time to speak to other people, because everybody here has an interest in Brazil. Some of you know A, others know B. Talk to each other.